Today's guest is Allison Puryear, who is an LCSW with a nearly diagnosable obsession with business development. She has started practices in 3 different cities and wants you to know that building a private practice is shockingly doable when you have a plan and support. Hi, Allison. How are you today?
I'm great. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing awesome. So we were just talking a little bit. You're calling in from. We're talking to you where you're in Asheville, North Carolina, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Gotcha. So great. So let's dive straight into it. I just want to hear a little bit more about how you got into the field of psychotherapy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I kind of decided I wanted to be a therapist when I was 11, despite not
Hmm.
knowing what that meant at all. I didn't have a therapist. I didn't know a therapist. I just thought it sounded really cool to sit and talk to people all day. Um, and then you fast forward several years. And in between undergrad and grad school, I worked at an inpatient eating disorder treatment program and did a lot of work there as a psych tech, but I was allowed to do things like run groups and things like that. And then grad school and several agency jobs that weren't exactly awesome for a number of different reasons. And then finally, I had an agency job plus a private practice for a long time, and I was in Athens, Georgia at that time. And then we were moving across the country to Seattle, and I thought, what better time to go full time into private practice than a city where I've never been before?
Hmm.
So that's when I launched into my first full time private practice.
Got it. So you were. So I think a lot of people can relate to this that are listening to work for those agencies and not really being the greatest environments. Not, of course, I'm just speaking generally. So if you can share a
Right.
little bit, because I'm sure the listeners can relate to it. What were some of the things that were tough about working for an agency?
Let's see. Well, the first agency I worked for out of grad school was a sexual assault center that was like a dream job, aside from paying $25,000 a year. But it was a dream job otherwise. And then our executive director relocated, and we got a new one who I think it's fair to say she was abusive. Like she would scream at us a lot and slam her fists on tables and things like that, and then didn't apply for the funding for any of the counseling positions at our nonprofit. So we all got laid off, and it was a pretty awful experience. The next job I had, they didn't pay us what they owed us, and so we had to sue them to get paid.
Mm,
I have some really bad examples.
yeah, that's.
Um, and then I had a job that was pretty good for a long time, and then some changes in leadership again really kind of wrecked what had been a really nice environment. So yeah, I feel like I'm a pretty good employee and I'm pretty easygoing, but by the time that job was going the way that it was going, I was really clear that I didn't want to be working for anyone else anymore.
Mhm.
So that's when I decided full-time private practice was my next step.
Yeah, I think a lot of listeners can relate to that as well, where they do want to have a little bit of sense of that control in the sense that they want to be able to be their own leader in their business. And with working for an agency or somebody else, you don't really have that. And you're actually at the whim of what the leadership brings in or the board brings into the agency. And so a lot of people make that leap because of that, because of the changes in leadership. So I'm glad, thank you for sharing openly about that because I know people can relate to that and maybe they're still at the agency listening to this right now and they want to go into private practice or they,
Hmm.
they can relate to that story of working for agencies and it was a tough leadership that changes were made and things like abuse and all the workplace drama. We all know
Yeah, yeah.
that.
It's so nice to avoid that now.
Absolutely, yeah, now that you're your own boss. So you were doing a little bit of part-time as well as the working for the agency. So what was that
Yeah.
transition and then the transition fully into the private practice, like tell us more about that as well.
Yeah. So I actually did full-time work plus a part-time private practice for 5 years, which now I'm like only youth could do that. Like I was young still, so I could roll like that. But um when my husband was accepted to University of Washington and we moved across the country to Seattle, that's when I decided it was time to make the leap. And I'm extroverted, I'm outgoing, and I was moving to a city where I literally I didn't have a single friend there. So I was like, well, I'll just network like crazy. I'll just meet everybody that I can and I'll just kind of spider web my way out to meet as many people as possible. And that's how I built my business for the most part. That's how I made my friends. It's how I filled my time, like I'd see 2 to 3 people a day sometimes and I'd be going all over the city, so it helped me learn the city. So it was a great way to to learn a new place and to meet new people because we already had this thing in common to talk about. And I could say, I'll come to you. What part of town are you in? And that way I was learning my way around, which takes me a little while. I'm directionally challenged. So
Was there a strategy to your networking? Were you meeting other therapists? Were you meeting with strategic partners? So what was your plan? Or was it just a numbers game and just meet as many people in many different industries? Just get your name out there.
yeah, it was primarily strategy with a little bit of like, I'm bored. I'll go to a BNI meeting to sub out for someone. But most of it was strategic. I specialize in eating disorders. So I met a lot of other eating disorder therapists, dietitians who work with eating disorders, OBGYNs who work with eating disorders, family practice docs who work with eating disorders. And whenever I was talking to them, I'd ask them, who else do you refer to in town? Who should I meet? And so I was able to grow my list of potential networking friends slash partners by asking who was great in town. And that ended up not just helping me build my practice, but also giving me great referral sources once I got full.
And then emotionally, how was it to make that full-time leap, coming to Seattle, not knowing anybody, starting over? So what was the emotions that came up when you did start and launch your first full-time private practice?
Yeah, well, I think like most people starting a business, there were moments of absolute terror and fear that like we were going to go broke. My husband's program took about like 80 hours a week. It was very intense. And so there was no way he could bring in any money. And I had walked in so confident, like, I'll just start a full-time practice in a brand new city. No big deal. And so there were a lot of tears. There was a lot of sitting on the floor feeling like a failure. But I'm nothing if not tenacious. So I just kept putting one foot in front of the other and trusting that at some point the phone was going to ring and it was going to ring so much I'd be full. So yeah, it sucked.
Yeah,
It sucked in the early stages.
it can. Yeah, I mean, it can. And that's why now you're helping people kind of, I assume, bridge that gap where it doesn't have to suck in the beginning, where you
Yeah.
are strategizing with therapists, helping them grow their business. And
Mhm.
one question though is, you are extrovert. I get the sense, just connecting with
Mhm.
you immediately. Do you have tips for people that are maybe not extroverted, that are a little bit more introverted? Because networking is important. How can an introvert network effectively?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I get asked that a lot because for some reason, a lot of introverts end up in my groups and in my programs and things like that. And so I shouldn't say for some reason because they're totally my people, but
Mhm.
I always fear I overwhelm introverts. But what I always say is like consistency is way more important than volume. So if you're an introvert, first off, you have to take care of yourself and not drain your energy, right? So to that end, networking with one or two people a week instead of five or 20, like I had done in the past, makes a lot more sense. And then you get used to like, okay, it's Tuesday. This is my networking lunch day. Um, and that way you're not only kind of acclimating yourself to networking and getting more comfortable with it because it's really just using the skills you're already really good at, like connecting with one another. I mean, that connection piece is so important in therapy. Everyone I've ever worked with practice building is an awesome person to connect with, right? And so it's just taking this skill set, reframing it some. This is not about selling yourself. I do not advocate for anybody going into a networking meeting and talking exclusively about their business and what their needs are, right? That's absolutely off putting.
Mhm.
But getting to know people as human beings first, getting to know their business, asking good questions, these are things that we tend to be really good at. So, consistency and some reframing is what I usually say for introverts.
I love that answer. I love it. I love you talking about connection as well. Because yeah, introverts usually, generally speaking, again, they have they do a little bit better with deeper connections with maybe a few people. So I like your idea
Mhm.
of doing a little bit less networking, but maybe forging deeper connections with those few people that you meet compared to a
Mhm.
big amount of people. And so I like that. Yeah, that's something that we've talked in the past. And so I'm glad that you reiterated that as well.
Yeah, yeah. And skip those networking meetings with a bunch of people. You don't need them.
One
You
on
know,
ones.
like
Yeah. Hmm.
if you're extroverted and you dig it, then do it. But
Hmm.
if it makes you want to panic, there are lots of other things you can panic about in your practice. That's not one that you need.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, networking is not just about, I love what you said also, Allison, about it's not just passing out cards and saying, hey, refer people to me, refer people to me. It's relationship building. And many therapists are good at that. They're good at forging those deeper connections and conversations and asking questions. So great tips on that for sure.
Thanks.
For your business development, what was your background in? I mean, you were doing agency. Did you have any experience in business development at all?
No.
How did you make the leap into developing businesses?
Yeah, were there were very few of us out there, right? When I went into full-time private practice, Casey Truffaut was around and Lynn Grotsky and David P. Diana had written a book. So I really just I wasn't as acclimated with the online world. This makes me feel really like it was ancient, like so long ago. But I just read everything I could get my hands on around starting a private practice, um, business books, networking books, um, and just kind of like trusted my my social cues, and hoped that I would pay attention to what people were telling me with their nonverbals as I was networking. And I've always loved writing, so I made sure and somehow intuitively knew that niching was going to be really important. And part of that was I loved the population I'd been working with, so I wanted to continue working with that population. But I wrote a website that was speaking directly to my ideal clients, and it had no SEO. Like you could only find it if somebody gave you my URL. But once you landed on it, you knew that I was the one that you wanted to call because I was speaking directly to you if you were struggling with those things. So I think that's one way that the networking came in handy is I had a website that when someone was referred to me, made it likely that they would choose me over people who were maybe having generalist websites.
Can you share a little bit more about social cues? I think that's an interesting topic. Like, what are some things that you look for when you're networking with someone? Some of those signs, those positive signs that you're looking for.
Yeah. So I think it's a really good question. Um, Ongoing conversation. There are some people we're going to connect with easier than others, and that's okay. Some people are just more like us or more like the people we like or whatever. If somebody's looking at their watch a lot, like some of those negative social cues
Yeah.
are the ones I was more afraid of, to be honest with you, of like, don't talk somebody's ear off because I do like to talk a lot and I can come off as intense for people who are more introverted or more shy. And so I learned to kind of calm myself down a little and take a few breaths instead of being as animated as I might typically be when I was around somebody I could tell I was starting to overwhelm. Um, and then the people who have the kind of energy level I do, we would just kind of like bounce off the walls together, and that was really fun. So yeah, just paying close attention instead of giving too much attention to any natural anxiety I might have about meeting somebody new or what we were going to talk about or any of those things.
That's great. So being really self-aware, having that emotional intelligence, looking at their cues, listening more than talking. However, when you do connect with someone that really matches your energy, to match that energy and go for it. So
Yeah.
great
Yeah.
tips again. This is awesome. Yeah, it's amazing. And then you also talked about speaking. I heard speaking to one when it came to your website and your website copy. Sales copy is what you write on your website
Mhm.
to attract those customers when they land on your website. So what was that one, and how did you develop that on your website? Did you do it yourself? Did you research?
Yeah, I did it. I did all the writing myself. I had a friend who was a web developer who just who threw it together for me technologically. But I'd been working with eating disorders for, I don't know, maybe, I don't even know. I can't do that math while I'm talking, but
Yeah.
for a long time. And I knew my ideal client. Like I knew the people that when I saw them on my schedule, I was really excited to meet with them. I knew the people who I saw on my schedule and was kind of like, all right, you can do this, and being able to differentiate the two kind of put the ideal client in starker contrast in a nice light that felt really comforting. And so I knew I wanted more of those clients. And so I used the words they used in my copy. Um, like at that time it was called FAQ about eating disorders or something, or about eating disorders, I think is what it was called then. And it was just a tab and it was answering the top questions I often get. And since my ideal clients were, maybe like 19 to 22, my one ideal client was 21. But since they were in that early adulthood age range, it said things like, I don't think it's that deep. I just think I want to be thinner, and used their rebuttals and spoke to those on the front end so that they could see I knew what they were thinking and that I had an answer that might not be what they wanted to hear, but was what they needed to hear. And I think that helped them build trust with me as an online presence in order to contact me.
Okay, cool. And then can we talk a little bit about the trajectory of your private practice? So you have three private practices now. When did you start to see the results in private practice, and then when did you decide to branch off and have two more private practices?
Oh no, I just have one at a time
One at a
because
time, yeah.
yeah, I can only do one. So they were just kind of with each move. So I had my practice in Athens, Georgia, my sweet part-time practice.
Uh-huh.
I had my full-time practice in in Seattle, and then now I have a full-time practice. Well, I guess it's part-time now, but it was full-time
Yeah.
in Asheville. And I've stepped that back some as my business consulting has grown because I'm learning you can't do everything.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
have to, you only have so much time and energy.
I see. So
So
same
yeah.
strategies you replicated in
hmm
those three areas.
Yeah, and it's great because all three, well, particularly the final two cities, Seattle and Asheville, are what are considered saturated markets. And so it would be easy to get caught up in the fear around that. But I will always run towards a saturated market with any kind of business because it means there's interest, right? There are enough consumers to buy your coffee if it's coffee saturated like Seattle, right?
Sure.
I would not be afraid to open a coffee shop in Seattle.
I see.
Um, so if there are a lot of therapists in your area, that's actually usually a great sign.
Got it. Yeah, that means that there's need out there, right? And
Absolutely.
there's ideal customers for the therapist.
hmm
In terms of the consulting now, let's put on your consulting hat. And
Yeah.
for the therapists that you work with, what are some common things that you see where therapists are struggling in building their practices?
Yeah. I think the first thing I see, just because of the way my curriculum works, is concerns about niching, right? People are afraid. It seems counterintuitive that you'd think if you cast a wider net, you'd be more likely to have more clients. But that whole, like when you speak to everyone, you speak to no one idea, if somebody's really suffering, they're going to trust you more and they're going to choose you if you're speaking exactly to that pain point. So, like, I often give the example of I had postpartum depression with my first daughter, and I'm a therapist. Like, I knew it was postpartum depression. I had no idea how to treat postpartum depression personally. So I knew that a lot of us were not trained in it. So when I went looking for a therapist, the person I chose, I didn't even look after I saw her website. I was like, this is my person, I'm calling her, because it was all about perinatal mood disorders. And I felt instantly safer and more hopeful having found her. And that's the kind of experience we want our clients to have, is to find us and feel like there's hope. And if you're just like, yeah, I treat anxiety and depression and bipolar disorder and relationship issues, like if you give the list, you don't really sound like the safe person.
Yeah, I see.
So, yeah, that's one thing I see. People really reticent to network and afraid of networking is another thing. And so that's something I work with people on. Money stuff. Oh, I
Mm,
love therapist money stuff.
yes.
Um, there's like fear around fee setting, fear around making money for maybe the first time in their life, fear about failing and not being able to afford their mortgage, those kinds of things. I find the money stuff is really so deeply rooted in our sense of security and our sense of self-worth. It's juicy stuff. Um, and systems. I talk a lot about systems because I'm real big on, I want I want the clinical work to be the focus of your practice. I want the business stuff to be as automated or streamlined as humanly possible. And yeah, the whole online world, like that's another thing of like whether to have a social media profile, like what that's going to do for you if that matches with your ideal client. I don't want people to have busy work. If their clients aren't on Facebook, please don't throw your energy there, you know? So, yeah.
Let's dive a little bit into a couple of those topics, perhaps. Could we start with the money issues a little bit?
Oh,
Because I
yeah.
know that's a very common theme: money blocks, money fears. Do you find that when people invest in themselves financially as psychotherapists, just that act alone releases some sort of the money fears, and you get what I'm saying, right? Yeah,
Yeah, I feel like it gets the ball rolling for
yeah,
sure. It's kind of like when our clients reach out for therapy, sometimes things get a little bit better, right?
yeah,
When people invest in their business in some way, in some aspects, it makes them feel a little bit more legitimate, right? Like I am a business owner making a business financial decision, and all of a sudden asking for, whatever fee they were hoping for feels slightly less scary. Um, I see an interesting pattern. So I've had people in my group who were raised by multimillionaires. I've had people in my group who were raised in poverty. And what I found is every single one of us has some version of money baggage that we're carrying around, whether it's guilt for having been really comfortable and feeling like we have to really earn what we're making or we're entitled. Or folks like I grew up working class. And so for those of us who are maybe have exceeded our parents' education or income, trying to navigate that. So yeah, it's just really fun work, honestly, because there's so much that you can learn about how the way that we've done money thus far in our adult life can influence or impact our practice.
Yeah, it's absolutely complex. I mean, there's a lot of different ways it can go exactly what you said. I mean, fear of success, fear of failure, fear of just not having money, fear of
Mhm.
making too much money and then getting too big-headed. I mean, I've heard it all as well. So it's a
Yeah,
great topic, and I'm glad that you were able to bring that up with your clients and in this podcast interview as well.
yeah.
How about the social media? Like, so would you suggest? So obviously, you said earlier. I mean, earlier you said that if your ideal client is not online, then you don't want to be in the online space. But what if they are? Like, how can you be on social media and still have have those boundaries set for yourself as a clinician?
Yeah. So I'm real big on the first thing you need to assess is which social media platforms you like and are comfortable with. If you think Snapchat sucks, I don't want you wasting your time on it. So being really clear about what you enjoy and what feels like a chore, because if something feels like a chore, there are already enough balls that you're juggling. If it feels like a chore, it's probably not worth your time. Um, so first that, and then looking at the overlap of what social media platforms your clients are likely to be on. So maybe you love Snapchat, but you really love working with, folks 70 and older. It's probably not going to be a great business builder for you to be on Snapchat for your business. Just do it for fun. Um, so looking at that overlap and then getting really clear about how each platform works and investing deeply in one platform and automating it as much as possible before moving on to a second platform.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, thanks. And so now we've reached the portion of this podcast interview which I've been calling. I'm looking to change it, but I think of some more creative. But it's the lightning round. It's a
Ooh,
series of a few questions, and I have not prepped Allison. She had no idea about
no
this,
pressure.
so yeah, no pressure at all. But I'm sure she'll do great. And so, if we can start with the question is, what is one business book you would recommend to psychotherapists out there to help build their business?
I'm really digging the one thing right now.
Hmm. Mhm.
Yeah, I'm working on getting focused myself, so I'm totally projecting that y'all might be too.
Yeah, it's a great book by Gary Keller, who is the CEO of Keller Williams, as well as Jay Papasan. So, The One Thing, that's a great recommendation. It's all about focusing on that one thing and not having like 20 different things, that one primary goal. So, great recommendation there. And I'm pretty sure you've answered this already, but I'm gonna ask you anyways. Is would you recommend niching or being a generalist?
Oh yeah, niching
Yeah,
for sure.
got it. What is one way that a psychotherapist can get over the mental block of starting a business?
I think first to get support, whether that's peers or like paid support, either one, but people who've been there, because it's super normal to be afraid.
One piece of technology that you would recommend to a psychotherapist to help their systems and processes in their business?
A good solid practice management system early on when you
Okay.
have time to learn it.
Okay. Is there one specifically that you like the best?
Yeah, I really like simple practice
Mhm.
personally. That's what I use in mine.
Okay, got it. Cool. So that's the end of the lightning round. You have survived, Allison.
Phew.
Thanks so much. And so, where can our listeners connect with you, Allison? What's the best way they can reach out to you?
Yeah, they can check me out at abundancepracticebuilding.com. Yeah.
Okay, abundancepracticebuilding.com. I'll drop all this in the show notes as well. You do have a podcast on there. You have a blog on there as well. You have some free resources available for therapists as well, correct?
Yes, that's true.
Great. Okay, Allison. Well, thank you so much for your time and your knowledge. Appreciate it, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks so much. Take care.